My hands shook as I signed the final deed transfer. The same hands that once exposed million-dollar tax fraud schemes for the IRS. 35 years of chasing down financial criminals, and here I was giving away my last asset, the downtown Phoenix office building that had been my retirement. Security, the notaries. Pen felt heavier than the gavel that sentenced the Delacroix cartel after my 3-year investigation. Back then, my signature meant justice. Today, it meant my son Diego would walk free from Maricopa County Jail. "That's everything, Mr. Rodriguez," said the lawyer, sliding the papers across his mahogany desk. "The bail bondsman has the funds. Diego should be released within 6 hours. $6.2 million. Gone." I stared at the Phoenix skyline through his 20th floor window, remembering when I'd bought that building with my government pension and savings. Solid brick, reliable tenants, steady income. Now it belonged to strangers, liquidated to free a son I barely recognized anymore. The elevator descended past floors where I'd once investigated white-collar criminals, people who stole from families, destroyed retirements, shattered trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. After decades of hunting predators, I'd become prey to my own paternal instincts. My phone buzzed. A text from my former colleague at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. "Saw the news about Diego. You okay, Bill? Need anything?" I typed back, "I'm fine, thanks," but I wasn't fine. My reputation had taken a beating ever since the arrest made headlines. IRS auditor's son arrested for financial crimes. The implication hung unspoken but clear. Like father, like son, or worse, like son, like father. At home, the silence felt different. No mortgage payments to worry about anymore. No property taxes, no maintenance calls from tenants. Just me, my Social Security check, and whatever charity my former colleagues could spare, without making it obvious. I opened the manila folder containing records from my 32 visits to see Diego. Each visit documented, with the same methodical precision I'd once applied to criminal investigations. Dates, times, topics discussed, his demeanor, requests he'd made. Something nagged at me about those conversations. The way he'd asked specific questions about asset protection, offshore accounts, estate planning. At the time, I'd assumed he was worried about his future, trying to understand how wealthy families protected their money. Now, sitting in my empty house, those questions felt different. More calculating, more informed than a 28-year-old should have been about international banking regulations. I pushed the thought away. Diego was my son, my only child since Maria passed away 3 years ago. He'd made mistakes, serious ones involving investment fraud, but he was still my blood. Still the boy who used to help me organize case files in my home office, asking endless questions about how bad guys tried to hide money. Maybe that's where I went wrong, teaching him too much about the very crimes I was supposed to prevent. The doorbell rang. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, stood on the porch holding a casserole dish, her face creased with sympathy that felt more like pity. "Heard about your situation. Bill, thought you might not feel like cooking." I accepted the dish, grateful but embarrassed. 6 months ago, she'd asked my advice about her taxes. Now she was bringing me charity meals. "Diego gets out tomorrow morning," I told her, though she hadn't asked. "This will all be behind us soon." She nodded, but her eyes held the same skeptical look I'd seen on agents' faces when suspects claimed innocence. People in the neighborhood were talking, wondering if the apple really did fall far from the tree. After she left, I returned to Diego's visitor logs, my investigator instincts refusing to stay buried. Something about visit number 24 stood out. He'd asked about the process for emergency asset liquidation, claiming he was worried I might need quick cash for medical bills. Thoughtful son or something else? I shook my head, ashamed of doubting him. Tomorrow Diego would walk out of jail, and we'd start rebuilding our lives, together. But as I closed the folder, I couldn't shake the feeling that my years of training criminals to hide money had taught me to recognize the signs when someone was playing a very long game. The morning Diego walked free, I sat in my kitchen reviewing every prison visit like it was a case file. 32 meetings over 8 months, each one documented with the obsessive precision that had made me the IRS's go-to auditor for complex fraud investigations. Visit number 1. Diego seemed genuinely remorseful, worried about legal fees. Normal son behavior. Visit number 7. First mention of asset protection strategies. He'd asked how wealthy families kept money safe during legal troubles. I'd assumed he was planning ahead, being responsible. Visit number 15. Detailed questions about international wire transfer regulations. Specifically, he wanted to know about reporting thresholds and timing requirements for offshore movements. Red flag I'd missed completely. My coffee grew cold as I spread the visitor logs across my kitchen table, like evidence boards from my federal days. The pattern emerged with sickening clarity. Each visit had built upon the last. Diego systematically extracting information about financial systems I'd spent decades mastering. Visit number 21 haunted me most. Diego had asked about emergency liquidation procedures, claiming concern for my health. Dad, what if you had a stroke? How fast could we convert everything to cash? At 68, it seemed like a caring son's legitimate worry. Now I saw it differently. He'd been mapping my entire financial infrastructure. The front door opened. Dad, I'm home. Diego's voice carried the same warmth I remembered from childhood, but something in my chest tightened. He looked thinner, institutional pallor replacing his usual phoenix tan, but his eyes held an alertness that seemed almost predatory. Welcome home, son. I gathered the papers quickly, not wanting to seem suspicious. He hugged me, and for a moment, I felt like the same father who'd coached his little league team, who'd taught him to change a tire, who'd walked him through his first tax return, but when he pulled back, his gaze lingered on the manila folders. What's all that paperwork, Dad? Just organizing some old case files. I lied, hating myself for the deception. Force of habit. Diego nodded, moving to the refrigerator like he still lived here. He'd never actually lived in this house. I'd bought it after his mother passed away, using proceeds from our family home in Scottsdale. Another detail that suddenly felt significant. I've been thinking, he said, opening a beer without asking, about what we discussed during my visits. The asset protection strategies. We should probably implement some of those ideas now, given everything that's happened. My investigator instinct screamed. Normal people just released from jail didn't immediately pivot to financial planning. They talked about freedom, about starting over, about gratitude. They didn't discuss offshore structures over lunch. Diego, you just got out. Maybe we should focus on... Dad, I learned a lot inside. His tone shifted, becoming more businesslike, about how the system really works, how people with money protect themselves. We can't be naive anymore. He pulled out a notebook, pages filled with diagrams, account structures, transfer mechanisms, the kind of sophisticated financial architecture that took years to design, not months in county lockup. Where did you learn all this? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. You'd be surprised how many financial experts end up in jail, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Guys who managed billions before they got caught. They have time to teach, and I had time to learn. The explanation made sense, but something felt rehearsed about his delivery, like he'd practiced this conversation. I appreciate you thinking ahead, but maybe we should take things slow. I'm still adjusting to... I gestured around the modest kitchen, our new circumstances. Diego's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. That's exactly why we need to move fast. You sacrificed everything for me, Dad. The least I can do is help you rebuild smarter. He opened his notebook to a page titled Rodriguez Family Financial Recovery Plan. The detail was staggering, projected timelines, investment strategies, risk assessments. This wasn't something you sketch out during recreational time. This was professional-level financial planning. Diego, this is incredibly thorough, almost like... I caught myself before saying, like a fraud scheme, but he noticed my hesitation. Like what, Dad? Like you've been planning this for a while? He laughed, but it sounded forced. 8 months in jail gives you plenty of time to think. I felt guilty every day, knowing what you were giving up for me. I had to come up with a way to make it right. The guilt manipulation was subtle but familiar. I'd seen it in hundreds of interviews. Suspects deflecting suspicion by appealing to emotions, making investigators feel bad for questioning their motives. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. Why don't you get settled in? We'll talk more tonight. Outside, I called my former colleague, Janet Chen, now running white-collar investigations for the FBI in Phoenix. We'd worked together on cross-jurisdictional cases for 15 years. Janet, it's Bill Rodriguez. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Has anyone been asking questions about me? About my finances? Silence. Then, Bill, are you somewhere we can talk privately? That was all the answer I needed. There's been some informal inquiry, she continued. Questions about whether you might have had advanced knowledge of Diego's activities. Whether the bail money came from legitimate sources. My worst fears confirmed. They weren't investigating just Diego anymore. They were investigating both of us. Janet, I think I might have made a terrible mistake. I was folding laundry when the breaking news alert flashed across my phone. Exclusive. Fraud suspect admits guilt in live interview. My blood went cold. Diego had left that morning saying he had a meeting with his lawyer. He hadn't mentioned any media interviews. I fumbled for the TV remote, switching to Channel 12 News, just as the anchor introduced the segment. In a shocking turn of events, Diego Rodriguez, recently released on a record-breaking $6.2 million bail, has agreed to speak publicly about his crimes for the first time. The camera cut to a familiar coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. Diego sat across from investigative reporter Sarah Walsh, wearing the same blue shirt he'd put on that morning. But something was different about his posture. Confident, almost defiant. Diego, you were released just 48 hours ago after your father liquidated his entire fortune for your bail. Why come forward now? Diego looked directly into the camera, his voice steady and clear. Because I can't live with the lie anymore. My father deserves to know the truth, and so does everyone else. My hands started shaking. This wasn't how innocent people talked. This was confession language. What truth is that? Walsh leaned forward. I'm guilty. Everything they accused me of, I did. The investment fraud, the falsified documents, the offshore accounts, all of it. Diego's eyes never wavered from the camera. But what's worse is how I manipulated the people closest to me to cover it up. The coffee shop seemed to spin around me. 8 months of visits, of legal fees, of believing in his innocence, of sacrificing everything, and he was guilty the entire time. You're referring to your father, former IRS auditor William Rodriguez? My father is a good man who spent his career catching criminals like me. The irony is that I used his love against him, exploited his expertise to help me hide money, and then let him give up everything to bail out someone who didn't deserve it. The reporter pressed further. Are you saying your father was involved in your criminal activities? No. Diego's answer came quickly, but then he paused, and that pause felt like a death sentence. My father believed in my innocence because I'm his son, but looking back, the questions I asked him, the financial advice I sought, someone with his background might have connected the dots if he wasn't blinded by paternal love. Someone with his background. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Diego had just suggested that any competent financial investigator would have recognized the signs, except for a father too emotionally compromised to see clearly. My phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, news alerts. My neighbors' names filled the screen, probably asking if I'd seen the interview. But one call stood out, Janet Chen from the FBI. Bill, where are you right now? At home, watching my son destroy both our lives on live television. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer your door. Don't make any statements. We need to meet. Through my living room window, I could see Mrs. Patterson peeking through her curtains. Across the street, a van with satellite equipment was pulling up. Within minutes, my quiet retirement neighborhood would become a media circus. The interview continued. Walsh asked about the $6.2 million. How do you feel knowing your father sacrificed everything for someone who was lying to him? Guilty doesn't begin to cover it. Diego's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of genuine emotion. But I also know my father well enough to believe he'd rather lose his money than his son. Even now, even knowing what I am, I think he'd make the same choice. The manipulation was masterful. Even in confession, Diego was playing the devoted son card, making his betrayal seem like twisted love rather than calculated exploitation. What happens now? Walsh asked. I turn myself in. I cooperate fully with investigators. And I try to make sure my father's reputation doesn't suffer for my choices. Too late for that. My phone showed 17 missed calls from former colleagues, 3 from reporters, and 1 from my attorney, who I probably couldn't afford anymore. The interview wrapped with Diego walking toward the federal building, cameras following his surrender. The anchor returned with breaking news updates. FBI sources confirm an ongoing investigation into potential co-conspirators in the Rodriguez fraud case, including family members who may have provided assistance. Family members. Singular, me. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, my life collapsing in real time. 35 years of impeccable service to the IRS, of catching criminals, of building a reputation for integrity, all reduced to one question. Did he know? The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw 2 agents in dark suits, badges visible. Behind them, news vans lined my street like vultures. This was how it felt to be on the other side of an investigation. The suffocating certainty that your life was about to be dissected by strangers, that every financial transaction, every conversation, every decision would be examined for criminal intent. I opened the door. Agents Morrison and Valdez, FBI. Mr. Rodriguez, we need to ask you some questions about your son's activities and your potential knowledge of his criminal enterprises. Am I under arrest? Not at this time. But we strongly recommend you contact an attorney before we continue this conversation. As they handed me their business cards, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly like every other suspect I'd helped investigate. Scared, confused, and guilty, until proven innocent. Except in my case, the guilt wasn't criminal. It was paternal. The guilt of loving someone so much that you ignore every red flag, dismiss every inconsistency, and sacrifice everything for someone who's been lying to you from the very beginning. At 6:47 a.m., they came with a warrant. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang, followed immediately by authoritative knocking. Through the window, I counted 8 federal agents, 2 Phoenix PD officers, and a forensic accountant I recognized from my IRS days. Federal search warrant for the premises and all financial records, Agent Morrison announced, handing me the document. We'll need you to step aside while we execute this search. 35 years of conducting these same raids, and I'd never understood the humiliation from the target's perspective. Strangers wearing latex gloves rifling through your personal belongings, photographing every document, treating your life like evidence in a crime scene. They started with my home office, the same room where I'd mentored young agents, where I'd broken down complex financial schemes, where I'd taught Diego about investigating fraud. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Mr. Rodriguez, Agent Valdez approached with a box of documents. We need to ask about these visitor logs from Maricopa County Jail. You documented every conversation with your son in unusual detail. I watched her flip through my meticulous notes. I'm a methodical person. Always have been. These notes include specific questions about offshore banking, asset protection, international wire transfers. Why was your son asking about these topics? Because I taught him well, I thought. Too well, he was worried about the future. About protecting what little we had left after his legal troubles. Agent Morrison joined us, holding a folder I recognized. This contains research on Cayman Islands banking regulations, Bermuda trust structures, and Swiss privacy laws. When did you compile this information? My mouth went dry. I'd forgotten about that folder. Research I'd done years ago for a complex tax evasion case involving international shell companies. Diego must have found it in my files. That's from an old IRS investigation. The Pemberton case 2019. Check your records. They exchanged glances. They'd check, but the timing looked suspicious. A father researching offshore strategies just before his son's arrest would raise red flags for any investigator. We found something else, Morrison said, producing a manila envelope I'd never seen before, hidden behind your filing cabinet. Inside were photocopies of bank routing numbers, account applications for 3 different offshore institutions, and a handwritten note in Diego's handwriting. Dad's emergency protocols, activate if needed. My legs nearly gave out. I've never seen these before. Diego must have hidden them here. When would he have had access to your office? The question hit like a physical blow. Diego had keys to my house. He'd been here countless times over the years, helping me organize files, asking questions about my cases, learning the very techniques I now realized he'd used against me. He has keys. He's my son, Agent Valdez softened slightly. Mr. Rodriguez, we know this is difficult, but we need you to understand how this looks. Your son commits financial crimes. You liquidate everything to bail him out, and now we find evidence of offshore planning in your home. I'm being set up. The words came out desperate, pleading. He planned this. All of it. That's what we're trying to determine. They continued searching for 3 hours. Every financial record, every computer file, every notebook got photographed and cataloged. They found my tax returns, proving the legitimacy of my wealth before Diego's arrest. They found correspondence with bail bondsmen, showing my desperate attempts to raise funds. They found my pension statements, Medicare documentation, Social Security records, the paper trail of a man who'd worked his entire life honestly. But they also found things that looked damning in context. Research materials that could support offshore planning, technical knowledge that could facilitate financial crimes, detailed documentation of conversations that, viewed suspiciously, might suggest coordination rather than paternal concern. At 10:15 a.m., they found the worst evidence yet. Mr. Rodriguez, Agent Morrison called from my bedroom. We found this in your nightstand drawer. A business card for Caledonian Trust Services, a Bermuda-based wealth management firm. On the back, someone had written, Account 7749MB 2024. William Rodriguez, $2.3 per hours initial deposit. I've never seen that before in my life. The handwriting matches samples we have from your visitor logs. I looked closer. It did look like my handwriting, but something felt off about the pen strokes, the letter spacing. Someone forged this. Who would have access to samples of your handwriting? The answer hung in the air between us. Diego had been copying my notes for months during our visits, claiming he wanted to study my investigation techniques for his own legal defense. I'd been flattered by his interest in my work. Now I understood why he'd been so interested in my penmanship. My son, I whispered. Agent Valdez sat down across from me. Mr. Rodriguez, let me be direct. We have evidence suggesting coordination between you and Diego to hide assets offshore. We have documentation of sophisticated financial planning hidden in your home. We have records of you systematically educating him about money, laundering techniques during his incarceration. Those were legitimate conversations. Between a father and son, maybe, but a federal prosecutor might see them differently. The forensic accountant approached with a laptop. We've accessed your computer. There are searches for Bermuda trust tax implications, Cayman Islands banking privacy, and statute of limitations offshore deposits, all within the last 6 months. I remembered those searches. I'd been trying to understand some of Diego's questions, researching the topics he'd asked about during our visits. Another innocent action that looked criminal in hindsight. He was asking me about these topics. I was researching them to give him better answers, or to help him hide money. By noon, they'd finished. My house looked like a tornado had hit it, but they'd been thorough, professional. They'd found enough circumstantial evidence to build a case against me if they wanted to. They'd also found enough legitimate documentation to support my innocence if they believed it. What happens now? I asked as they packed their evidence boxes. We analyze everything. We'll be in touch. After they left, I stood in my devastated living room, understanding for the first time how expertly I'd been manipulated. Diego hadn't just stolen my money. He'd systematically created evidence that would implicate me in his crimes, ensuring that if he ever got caught, he could drag me down with him. It wasn't just theft. It was insurance, and it was brilliant. The FBI had returned my visitor logs after scanning them into evidence. Sitting in my ransacked living room that evening, I opened the manila folder for the first time with investigator eyes instead of father eyes. 32 visits. 32 detailed conversations. And suddenly I wasn't reading them as a concerned parent. I was reading them like the federal auditor I'd been for 3.5 decades. Visit number 1, September 14th. Diego seemed genuinely remorseful about his situation. Asked about legal procedures, typical sentencing guidelines, normal concerns. Visit Number 7, October 2nd. Diego asked about asset protection during legal proceedings. Specifically wanted to know how wealthy families keep money safe during investigations. I explained basic principles of legal trusts and offshore banking as educational information. I'd written it all down. Every question, every topic, every suspicious detail that my paternal bias had dismissed as normal curiosity. Visit Number 12, October 23rd. Diego's questions are becoming more technical. Today he asked about the difference between reporting requirements for wire transfers under $10,000 versus over. Also inquired about banking privacy laws in different countries. He claims he's researching for a book about financial crimes he wants to write after his release. A book. I'd believe that lie completely. What kind of investigator accepts a story that flimsy without verification? Visit Number 18, November 15th. Diego asked me to explain the Pemberton case methodology, how we tracked money through multiple jurisdictions. He was particularly interested in our timeline reconstruction techniques and how we identified the original source funds despite complex layering. Said it would help him understand how investigators think. Reading my own notes now felt like studying a crime in progress. I documented everything with professional precision, never realizing I was creating a record of systematic intelligence gathering by a sophisticated criminal. Visit 24, December 3rd. Concerning conversation today, Diego asked specific questions about emergency liquidation procedures. How quickly could assets be converted to cash? What documentation would be required? He framed it as concern for my age and health, but the questions felt unusually detailed. I'd noted my own suspicions and then ignored them. Even my subconscious had been warning me, but my heart had overruled my head. Visit 29, December 20th. Diego presented a hypothetical scenario about protecting inherited wealth from creditors. The scenario was remarkably similar to our actual family situation. When I pointed this out, he laughed and said he was just thinking about worst-case planning. He's always been a planner, always been a planner. The phrase jumped out at me now. Diego hadn't been planning for worst-case scenarios. He'd been planning the worst-case scenario. I grabbed a yellow legal pad and started mapping the progression, using the same analytical framework I'd employed on hundreds of financial crime investigations. Each visit built on the previous one. The questions became more sophisticated, more targeted, more operational. By visit number 32, the final meeting before his release, Diego had extracted a complete education in international banking regulations, asset protection strategies, wire transfer protocols, investigation techniques, emergency liquidation procedures, offshore privacy laws, evidence preservation methods. I'd been his unwitting professor in a master class on financial crime. But as I continued analyzing, something else emerged from my notes. Things Diego probably didn't realize I'd documented. Inconsistencies in his stories, technical knowledge he shouldn't have possessed, references to people and procedures that contradicted his timeline. Visit Number 16, November 8th. Diego mentioned meeting someone named Marcus, who taught him about cryptocurrency exchanges. Later corrected himself, saying he meant Martin. When I asked for clarification, he claimed he was tired and mixing up names, Marcus versus Martin. I'd noted the discrepancy but hadn't pursued it. Now it looked like a slip, Diego referring to someone by their real name before catching himself and using an alias. Visit Anchor 21. November 26th. Diego described the jail's educational programs in detail, including a financial literacy course. Later mentioned advanced concepts about shell corporations that wouldn't be covered in basic financial literacy. When questioned, said he'd been reading law library materials. The jail's law library wouldn't have contained sophisticated guidance on shell corporation structures, but Diego had demonstrated knowledge that suggested professional training or coaching. Visit 27, December 10th. Diego seemed nervous today, checking over his shoulder frequently. Asked if our conversations were being recorded. I assured him that attorney-client privilege didn't apply to father-son visits, but regular visiting rooms weren't monitored for content. He relaxed after this, I documented his operational security concerns. Diego had been worried about surveillance because he was planning something that required secrecy. The pattern was clear now. Diego hadn't just been extracting information from me. He'd been receiving information from someone else. Someone with sophisticated knowledge of financial crimes. Someone who'd been coaching him on what questions to ask, what intelligence to gather. I picked up my phone and called Janet Chen. Janet, it's Bill. I need to tell you something about my visitor logs. I think Diego was working with someone else. Bill, you shouldn't be calling me directly. You need to go through your attorney. I don't think I'm the target anymore. I think I'm a witness. Silence. Then what do you mean? My notes document a systematic intelligence gathering operation. Diego was being coached by someone with professional knowledge of financial investigations. Someone who knew exactly what information would be valuable for planning sophisticated crimes. Can you prove that? I looked down at my notes, seeing them clearly for the first time. I think I already did. I documented everything, Janet. Every suspicious detail, every inconsistency, every red flag. I just didn't realize I was building a criminal case instead of visiting my son. Send me everything. Tonight. What about the planted evidence in my house? If you can prove Diego was working with professionals, it supports the theory that you were being set up. Someone taught him how to forge documents, how to plant evidence, how to build false narratives. After hanging up, I continued reviewing my notes with 35 years of investigative experience finally engaged. By midnight, I'd identified 17 specific instances where Diego had demonstrated knowledge he shouldn't have possessed, referenced contacts he'd never mentioned before, or asked questions that suggested professional coaching. I wasn't just a victim of financial fraud. I was a victim of sophisticated espionage conducted by my own son on behalf of criminal associates who'd recognized the value of compromising a veteran federal investigator. But in their arrogance, they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I would act like a father instead of an investigator. They were wrong. I was both, and now the investigator was awake. I spent the next morning doing what I'd done for 35 years, following the money. The bail bondsman's records were public. $6.2 million, transferred from my liquidated assets to Maricopa County Superior Court on December 28th. But money doesn't just disappear, it leaves digital footprints, and I knew how to read them. My first call was to Rick Castellanos, my former partner from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He'd retired to Tucson but still maintained contacts throughout federal law enforcement. Rick, I need a favor. Unofficial consultation on a financial tracking problem. Bill, I heard about your situation. You sure you want to be poking around in this? I'm sure Diego didn't work alone. Someone taught him things he couldn't have learned in county jail. I explained my analysis of the visitor logs. Rick listened without interrupting, a skill we'd both developed during decades of interviewing suspects who revealed more when they felt heard. Okay, he said finally. What do you need? Access to FinCEN databases. I want to track unusual monetary instrument reports filed around Diego's arrest date. Bill, you know I can't give you direct access. I'm not asking for access. I'm asking you to run the queries and tell me what you find. Within 2 hours, Rick called back. 3 unusual currency transaction reports filed in Phoenix between November 15th and December 30th, all just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. 2 at different branches of Chase Bank, 1 at Wells Fargo. Structuring. Classic money laundering technique. Breaking large transactions into smaller amounts to avoid automatic reporting requirements. Diego had learned well. Did you get the account information? Can't share that, but I can tell you the accounts were opened within 60 days of the transactions, all with minimal documentation, all listing temporary addresses. Temporary addresses meant the accounts were designed to disappear. Professional-level operational security. Rick, this is bigger than just Diego. I'm starting to see that. What's your next move? My next move violated about 6 federal regulations, but I was past caring about bureaucratic niceties. I called Janet Chen. Janet, I need you to request financial records for all accounts opened in Diego's name during the 6 months before his arrest. Bill, you're not a federal agent anymore. You can't direct investigations. I'm not directing anything. I'm providing intelligence based on my analysis of documented conversations. Someone taught Diego how to structure transactions, how to open accounts with minimal documentation, how to use temporary addresses for financial operations. How do you know about the temporary addresses? Because I know how these operations work. And I know Diego didn't learn this in jail. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Marcus Webb knocked on my door at 3:17 p.m., introducing himself as an investigator from the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions. Mr. Rodriguez, we've been investigating unusual account activity connected to your son's case. Your former colleague, Rick Castellano, suggested we speak with you. I invited him in, noting his credentials were legitimate. Webb was younger than most state investigators, but his questions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of financial crimes. We've identified a pattern of structured deposits totaling approximately $3.8 million, conducted through multiple institutions over a 4-month period, Webb explained. The sophistication suggests professional guidance. Someone was teaching Diego how to move money without triggering federal reporting requirements. That's our assessment. But we need help understanding the timeline. When did your son first demonstrate knowledge of these techniques? I retrieved my visitor logs, walking Webb through the progression of Diego's questions. He took notes with the methodical precision I recognized from my own investigative work. Visit number 19, I pointed out. Diego asked about the difference between currency transaction reports and suspicious activity reports. That's not information you pick up casually, Webb nodded. Someone with federal law enforcement experience would know that distinction. A chill ran down my spine. You think a federal agent was involved? Or someone with access to federal training materials? The techniques your son employed are consistent with methods taught in advanced financial investigation courses. We spent 2 hours mapping Diego's knowledge progression against known training curricula from various federal agencies. The correlation was disturbing. Diego had systematically acquired skills taught only to professional investigators. Mr. Rodriguez, we need to consider that you weren't just a target for financial exploitation. You were targeted for intelligence gathering about federal investigative techniques, industrial espionage. Exactly. Someone wanted to understand how federal investigators track money, how we identify patterns, how we build cases. Your son was their collection asset. The scope of the conspiracy expanded in my mind. This wasn't just about stealing my money. It was about compromising federal law enforcement capabilities by extracting operational intelligence from a veteran investigator. How many other retired agents have been targeted this way? We're investigating similar patterns in 7 other jurisdictions, all involving family members of retired federal investigators, all using identical techniques. 7 other families. 7 other investigators who'd been manipulated through their love for family members. The scale suggested organized criminal enterprise, not individual opportunism. What's the next step? Webb closed his notebook. We build a case, but we need your help to understand the full scope of information Diego extracted from you. You want me to be a cooperating witness. We want you to be what you've always been, an investigator. Help us understand how this network operates, how they recruit assets, how they exploit family relationships to compromise federal investigators. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a new purpose. For 8 months, I'd been a victim. Starting tomorrow, I'd be a federal investigator again, even if unofficially. Diego had made one crucial error. He'd assumed that love would make me stupid permanently, that paternal instincts would override professional training forever. He'd never considered that discovering his betrayal might transform me from a grieving father into a very angry, very experienced federal investigator with nothing left to lose. His criminal associates were about to learn why I'd spent 35 years successfully hunting people like them. The hunt was beginning. The breakthrough came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday, when I couldn't sleep and decided to analyze Diego's notebook, the one he'd shown me after his release, filled with his supposed rehabilitation planning. Under my desk lamp, using a magnifying glass I'd kept from my evidence analysis days, I studied the pages more carefully. What I found made my blood run cold. The notebook wasn't random jailhouse scribblings. It was a professional operational manual. Page 12 contained a detailed timeline. Phase 1. Establish credibility through initial genuine legal troubles. Phase 2. Extract intelligence during visitation period. Phase 3. Execute emergency liquidation protocol. Phase 4. Public confession to transfer suspicion. Phase 5. Asset recovery and disappearance. Was looking at a 5-phase operation designed to systematically destroy me while enriching Diego and his associates. The handwriting analysis I'd learned during document fraud investigations revealed something crucial. 3. Different people had contributed to this notebook. Diego's distinctive slanted script appeared throughout, but technical sections showed different pen pressure and letter formation patterns. Someone had been coaching him extensively. Page 18 outlined target psychology management, a clinical analysis of my personality, my professional background, my emotional vulnerabilities. They'd profiled me like a hostile intelligence asset. Subject demonstrates strong paternal loyalty, despite professional skepticism. Exploit emotional attachment through perceived threat to family member. Subject's investigative training creates overconfidence and ability to detect deception from trusted sources. They'd understood exactly how to manipulate me, use my love against my training, make me choose between being a father and being an investigator. The most damaging section appeared on page 23, Intelligence Collection Objectives. They'd wanted specific information about federal investigative techniques, database access protocols, interagency coordination procedures, and evidence preservation standards. I wasn't just funding Diego's criminal activities. I was providing intelligence that could compromise ongoing federal investigations nationwide. But the notebook revealed something Diego hadn't intended to document: the names and contact information of his criminal associates. Marcus Chen, technical coordination, with a phone number I recognized as belonging to someone in the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Sarah Valdez, legal framework, with an address in Washington, D.C., near the Department of Justice headquarters. Michael Torres, operational security, listing credentials from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. The conspiracy involved active federal employees, people with legitimate access to the systems and information Diego had been collecting intelligence about. I photographed every page with my phone, then called Janet Chen on her secure line. Janet, I found Diego's operational manual. This goes all the way to Washington. Bill, it's almost 3 in the morning. They have people inside Treasury, Justice, and FLETC. This isn't just financial fraud. It's espionage. Silence. Then, I'm coming over. Don't touch anything else. Don't make any more calls. Don't leave your house. While waiting for Janet, I analyzed the notebook's final section. Exit strategy. Diego had never intended to serve prison time or face consequences. His public confession wasn't genuine remorse. It was misdirection designed to focus attention on me while he implemented his disappearance plan. According to his timeline, he had a 72-hour window after confession to finalize asset transfers and initiate extraction protocol. Today was hour 68. Diego was planning to disappear in 4 hours. Janet arrived with 2 other agents I didn't recognize. They wore tactical gear under casual clothing, a sign they expected this situation to escalate quickly. Bill, show us what you found. I walked them through the notebook analysis, pointing out the different handwriting samples, the operational timeline, the intelligence collection objectives. Janet's expression grew darker with each revelation. Jesus Christ, Bill. This is a counterintelligence nightmare. If they've compromised federal employees with access to ongoing investigations, we need to move on Diego tonight, one of the other agents said, before he disappears. What about his associates? Simultaneous arrests. But we need probable cause for federal employees. I handed Janet my visitor logs again, cross-referenced the questions Diego asked with the access levels of his alleged associates. I documented intelligence requests that only people with specific clearances would know to make. Agent Morrison, the same one who'd searched my house, studied my analysis. Visit 16. Diego asked about protocols for interagency information sharing on financial crimes. That's not public information. Visit 24, I continued. He wanted to know about database audit trails and how investigators track query histories. Someone with FinCEN access would need that information to cover their tracks. Visit 31. Questions about evidence preservation standards for digital financial records. Someone planning to destroy evidence would need to understand retention requirements. The pattern was unmistakable. Diego had been collecting intelligence about federal law enforcement capabilities, procedures, and vulnerabilities on behalf of criminal associates embedded within the system. How long has this been going on? Janet asked. I checked Diego's timeline again. According to this, they've been planning my recruitment for 18 months. Diego's initial arrest was legitimate, but they saw an opportunity and decided to exploit it. Recruitment. They weren't just stealing my money, Janet. They were recruiting me as an unwitting intelligence asset. Every piece of information I gave Diego was passed to his handlers for analysis and operational use. Janet's phone buzzed with a secure message. She read it, then looked up grimly. Diego just boarded a flight to Grand Cayman. We're too late. No, I said, studying the timeline again. We're exactly on schedule. Diego was supposed to disappear today, but look at Phase 6. I pointed to a section I'd initially missed. Phase 6, International Coordination for Expanded Operations. Establish Caribbean base for recruitment of additional assets. He's not disappearing, I realized. He's expanding the operation. Grand Cayman isn't his exit. It's his headquarters. Janet smiled grimly. Then we know exactly where to find him. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like the investigator instead of the victim. Diego had made the classic criminal mistake. He documented his entire operation because he was proud of its sophistication. His arrogance would be his downfall. 24 hours later, I was on a plane to Grand Cayman, officially listed as a consulting expert for a joint FBI Treasury Department operation. Janet had fought to include me. Bill's the only one who understands Diego's psychology and operational methods. We need him for the takedown. The flight gave me time to study everything we'd learned about Diego's criminal network. 5 federal employees, 2 state investigators, and 3 private financial consultants, all working together to exploit retired law enforcement officers through their family members. The scope was staggering. They'd stolen over $40 million while simultaneously collecting intelligence that could compromise hundreds of ongoing federal investigations. But Diego had made one crucial error. He'd underestimated his father. Our team landed in Georgetown at 3:20 p.m. Within an hour, we'd identified Diego's location through banking records and cellular data. He was staying at the Ritz-Carlton, using the name Michael Rodriguez, close enough to his real identity to feel comfortable, different enough to provide plausible deniability. Classic amateur mistake. Professional criminals disappear completely. Diego was playing rich tourist. He's scheduled to meet someone at the Cayman National Bank tomorrow at 10 a.m. Agent Morrison briefed us. Probably finalizing asset transfers before establishing permanent residency. Or recruiting new assets, I added. According to his timeline, Grand Cayman is operational headquarters for expansion. He's not hiding, he's building, Janet nodded, which means he feels secure, overconfident. Exactly like he felt when he was manipulating me. We spent the evening planning the approach. Standard arrest procedures wouldn't work. Diego would claim he was visiting legally, had committed no crimes in Cayman jurisdiction, and demand extradition proceedings that could take months. Instead, we needed him to reveal his criminal activities voluntarily. I have an idea, I told the team, but it requires Diego believing I'm still his victim, not his hunter. The next morning, I sat alone in the Ritz-Carlton lobby at 9:15 a.m., reading a newspaper and drinking coffee like any other tourist. When Diego emerged from the elevator at 9:47, his face showed genuine shock. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I stood slowly, letting him see my confusion, my hurt, my desperate father persona. Looking for my son. Looking for answers. How did you find me? Your notebook. The one you left at the house. It had travel information. Diego's eyes narrowed, calculating. He was deciding whether to run or to continue his manipulation. His arrogance won. Dad, sit down. Let me explain everything. We moved to a corner table where Janet and Morrison could record everything through directional microphones. Diego ordered coffee, acting like we were having a normal family conversation. The confession was part of the plan, he began. I had to clear your name publicly. Make it obvious you weren't involved by admitting you were guilty. Because I am guilty, Dad, but not of the crimes they charged me with. Classic misdirection. Admit to lesser crimes to hide greater ones. I stole money, yes, but I stole it from criminals. Money laundering operations, drug cartels, terrorist financing networks. I was working with federal agents to expose financial crimes. The lie was sophisticated, appealing to my sense of justice while explaining his criminal knowledge and federal connections. What federal agents? People I can't name. Deep cover operations. The money I took was already stolen. I was just redirecting it to legitimate purposes. Like what? Like securing your retirement. Like making sure you were protected if anything happened to me. He reached across the table, grabbing my hand with apparent sincerity. Dad, I sacrificed myself to save you. The confession, the public humiliation, letting everyone think I betrayed you, it was all to establish your innocence. For a moment, I almost believed him. The performance was that good. If that's true, why did you disappear without telling me? Because the criminals I exposed have resources. They could hurt you to get to me. I had to create distance. And the notebook? The operational timeline? Diego's expression flickered, surprised that I'd analyzed his documentation so thoroughly. Dad, you taught me to document everything. Plan for contingencies. That notebook was my insurance policy. Insurance against what? Against the criminals finding out I'd stolen from them. Against corrupt federal agents trying to silence me. Against anyone who might try to hurt my family. He was good, very good. But not good enough to fool someone who'd interrogated hundreds of sophisticated criminals. Diego, show me the money. What? If you stole money to protect me, show me where it is. Prove that you didn't just manipulate me into funding your criminal operation. His confidence wavered. Dad, it's not that simple. The money is in protected accounts, held as evidence in ongoing federal investigations. Which investigations? I can't tell you that. It's classified. Then call your federal handlers. Have them verify your story. Diego's facade cracked slightly. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. You've been under tremendous stress. No. Diego, I'm thinking like an investigator for the first time in 8 months. I leaned forward, using the interrogation techniques I'd perfected over 3 decades. You want to know what I found in your notebook? Evidence that you've been collecting intelligence about federal investigative procedures on behalf of criminal associates embedded within law enforcement agencies. That's not Marcus Chen from FinCEN, Sarah Valdez from Justice, Michael Torres from FLETC. Should I continue? Diego's eyes showed genuine fear for the first time. Dad, you don't understand what you're getting into. I understand perfectly. You recruited me as an unwitting intelligence asset. You exploited my love for you to compromise federal law enforcement capabilities. You stole my money to fund a criminal operation that threatens national security. You can't prove any of that. I smiled, feeling like myself again for the first time since this nightmare began. Diego, I've been documenting everything for 8 months. Every conversation, every inconsistency, every piece of evidence you accidentally left behind. Even if that's true, I'm in Cayman now. You can't touch me here. Actually, Janet said, approaching our table with her credentials visible. We can. Diego bolted toward the exit, but Morrison was waiting. The arrest was clean, professional, and recorded by 3 different surveillance teams. As they read him his rights, Diego looked at me with genuine confusion. Dad, I'm your son. No, I replied. My son died 8 months ago. You're just the criminal who was wearing his face. They gave me 20 minutes alone with Diego before his extradition to Phoenix. 20 minutes to say goodbye to the son I'd raised and to confront the criminal he'd become. The Grand Cayman Detention Center was sterile, professional. Diego sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed to a metal table. For the first time since his original arrest, he looked genuinely defeated. You documented everything, he said quietly. Even when you thought you were just being a concerned father. 35 years of training doesn't disappear because someone shares your DNA. I counted on that training making you overconfident, making you think you'd notice if your own son was lying to you. The admission stung because it was accurate. I had been overconfident in my ability to read people, in my immunity to emotional manipulation, in my capacity to separate personal relationships from professional judgment. How long have you been planning this? Diego leaned back, studying my face. Since Mom died. I watched you grieve, saw how lonely you were, how desperate you were to maintain our connection. Grief makes people vulnerable, Dad. Even federal investigators. The clinical coldness in his voice was worse than anger. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment crime or desperate circumstances. This was calculated exploitation of his father's mourning. Your mother would be devastated. My mother is dead. She doesn't get a vote anymore. I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face, trying to find some trace of the boy who'd helped me build birdhouses in the garage, who'd asked endless questions about right and wrong, who'd once cried when he accidentally stepped on a spider. When did you become this person? I've always been this person, Dad. You just chose not to see it. That's not true, really. Remember when I was 12 and Mrs. Patterson's dog went missing? You found me feeding it in our shed, and I told you I was protecting it from the pound. You were so proud of my compassion, I remembered. Diego had kept the dog for 3 days before we discovered it. I stole that dog because I wanted to see if I could make an old woman cry. The story about protecting it was improvisation when you caught me. The memory shifted, recontextualized by this revelation. I'd praised him for kindness that was actually cruelty. How many other times? High school, college, my first job. I've been lying to you my entire life, Dad. Testing how much I could manipulate you before you'd notice. The investment firm job. The clients you claimed to help. Ponzi scheme. Lasted 18 months before someone complained to the SEC. I used your reputation as character reference. Son of a federal investigator. Raised with strong ethical values. Clients trusted me because they trusted you. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. My son hadn't just betrayed me recently. He'd been using me as cover for criminal activities for years. Why tell me this now? Because you won. Because I want you to understand exactly what you're destroying when you testify against me. Diego leaned forward, his cuffed hands pressed against the table. You're not just sending a criminal to prison, Dad. You're sending your son. The same son you taught to ride a bike, who you took to baseball games, who you hugged every night before bed. The emotional manipulation was expert level. Even knowing what he was doing, I felt the pull of paternal instinct. Those memories are real, even if everything else was fake. Are they? Or were they just part of my long-term strategy to maintain your emotional investment? I studied his face, searching for any trace of genuine feeling. You're lying. Nobody is that calculating from childhood. You want to believe that because the alternative is too painful. The alternative is accepting that you raised a sociopath who's been exploiting your love for decades. Stop. You taught me about criminal psychology, Dad, about how predators think, how they manipulate victims, how they exploit trust. Did you never wonder if you were teaching those skills to someone who might use them? The question I'd been avoiding since this nightmare began. Had I created the monster that destroyed me? You made your own choices, Diego, did I? Or did I make the choices you trained me to make? You showed me how criminals think, how they operate, how they justify their actions. Maybe I just learned too well. I taught you about criminals so you could recognize them, so you could protect yourself. And I did protect myself. From poverty, from mediocrity, from the limitations of honest work. Everything I learned from you, I used successfully. You destroyed innocent people. I optimized available resources. Language matters, Dad. You taught me that too. I stood up, unable to continue sitting across from this person who looked like my son, but spoke like a textbook psychopath. I'm done. With the conversation, or with me? Both, Dad. For the first time, his voice cracked slightly. I'm still your son. I turned back to look at him one final time. No, my son was kind, honest, and caring. I don't know who you are, but you're not him. Those qualities were real when they served my purposes. Then they weren't real at all. Diego's mask slipped completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You're going to regret this choice. When you're alone in that empty house with no family left, no money, no purpose, you're going to remember that you chose justice over love. I'm choosing justice because of love. Love for the other families you've destroyed. Love for the memory of who I thought you were. Love for the country I served for 35 years. How noble. How completely useless. I walked toward the door, then paused. Diego, your mother didn't just love you despite your flaws. She loved you because she believed you could be better than your worst impulses. I spent 8 months trying to honor that belief. And now? Now I know she was wrong. Some people can't be saved. Dad, my name is Mr. Rodriguez. We're not family anymore. As the door closed behind me, I heard him calling my name. Not Mr. Rodriguez, Dad. But the word had lost all meaning. The boy who'd called me Dad was gone. Had been gone for years, maybe decades. The man in that cell was just a criminal who happened to share my genetics, and I was finally ready to stop being his victim. 6 months later, I stood in the Phoenix federal courthouse as Diego received his sentence. 35 years without possibility of parole for financial crimes, conspiracy, and espionage. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. Mr. Rodriguez systematically exploited family relationships to compromise federal law enforcement capabilities, endangering national security for personal gain. Diego didn't look at me during sentencing. I didn't look at him either. The media had transformed. My story from foolish father enables criminal son to veteran investigator exposes national security threat. The same reporters who'd questioned my competence now called me a hero. I didn't feel like either a fool or a hero. I felt like a man who'd finally learned the difference between love and enablement. Mr. Rodriguez approached Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen after the hearing. The recovered assets from the Cayman accounts, you're entitled to restitution of approximately $3.8 million. Not everything, but enough. Enough for dignity, enough for independence, enough to rebuild without starting from nothing. What about the other families? The other victims of this network? 14 families total. Your investigation provided the framework for exposing the entire operation. Because you documented everything, because you helped us understand their methods, we recovered assets for everyone. 14 families. 14 retired federal agents who'd been manipulated through their love for children, spouses, siblings. All of us used, all of us exploited, all of us victims of our own dedication to family, but also all of us survivors. Outside the courthouse, Janet Chen waited with paperwork that would change my life again. Bill, I have a proposition. The FBI wants to establish a new unit focused on crimes targeting law enforcement families. Financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, espionage recruitment. We need someone who understands both the investigative side and the victim experience. You want me to come back? Consultant status. Flexible schedule. Work with families who've been targeted. Help them understand the manipulation. Teach them to recognize the signs. I looked at the manila folder she handed me. Inside were case files. 12 active investigations involving family members of federal agents, all showing patterns similar to Diego's operation. How many more are out there? We estimate hundreds. This type of exploitation is becoming more common as criminal organizations realize the intelligence value of compromising federal investigators through emotional manipulation. The scope was staggering, but so was the opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing what I'd endured. When do I start? 3 weeks later, I sat across from Margaret Collins, a retired DEA agent whose daughter had been arrested for drug trafficking. The daughter claimed innocence, begged for bail money, and asked detailed questions about DEA operational procedures during family visits. I keep thinking I should have seen the signs, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. The signs are only obvious in hindsight, I replied. These criminals are professionals. They know exactly how to exploit our love for family. But I'm a federal agent. I should have been smarter. Being smart has nothing to do with it. Being a parent, being someone who loves family, that made us vulnerable. It also makes us human. I handed her my visitor logs from Diego's case. This is what manipulation looks like when documented by a 35-year veteran of financial crimes investigation. I missed every red flag because I was a father first, investigator second. Margaret studied my notes, recognizing the patterns in her own daughter's behavior. How do you get past the guilt? You use it. You let it motivate you to help other families, to prevent other people from being exploited the same way. Does it get easier? I thought about that question carefully. The pain gets different, less sharp, more purposeful. You stop grieving for the person you thought they were, and start fighting for the people who might be saved. Over the following months, I worked with 17 families, retired FBI agents, IRS investigators, DEA officers, ATF specialists, all targeted through family members who'd been recruited by criminal organizations seeking intelligence about federal law enforcement capabilities. Each case followed similar patterns: legitimate legal troubles creating vulnerability, systematic extraction of operational intelligence during family interactions, manipulation of parental love to fund criminal activities, and finally the devastating discovery of betrayal. But each case also demonstrated the resilience of people who dedicated their lives to justice. Once they understood the scope of the manipulation, once they stopped blaming themselves for being loving parents, they became powerful allies in exposing and dismantling these networks. The work gave my life new meaning. Instead of mourning the son I'd lost, I focused on protecting the families I could save. 6 months after Diego's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter. No return address, postmark from federal prison in Colorado. Dad, I've had time to think about our last conversation. I want you to know that some of the memories were real. The baseball games, the birdhouse projects, the bedtime stories, those meant something to me, even if I couldn't express it properly. I hope someday you can forgive me. Diego. I read it twice, then filed it away without responding. Forgiveness might come eventually. Reconciliation never would. But the letter reminded me of something important. The love I'd felt for Diego hadn't been wrong, even if it had been manipulated. Love itself wasn't the problem. Love without boundaries was the problem. I'd learned to love more carefully, more wisely, but not less deeply. Standing in my rebuilt home office, surrounded by case files of families I was helping, I understood that my story wasn't about the son who'd betrayed me. It was about the choice between bitterness and purpose, between being a victim and being a survivor. I'd chosen purpose. I'd chosen to survive, and in helping other families navigate their own betrayals, I'd found something more valuable than the money Diego had stolen. The knowledge that love, when channeled properly, could still change the world, even when it came too late to save the people we'd originally meant to protect.